One rule ignored, one boundary crossed, one decision made in a moment of confidence. That's all it took to turn ordinary park visits into fatal scenes. In this episode, we examine how dumb, avoidable choices end lives in places built for fun. It was June 22, 2014, at a regional amusement park outside Atlanta. Heat pressed down on the asphalt, stretching wait times and tempers. Phones stayed raised for reaction clips. The coaster cycled on schedule all afternoon. One teenage decision turned a routine dispatch into a silent shutdown and a recovery scene. Eli Carter was 16, a high school junior who split his time between classes and football conditioning. He was lean, competitive, and openly resentful of being corrected. He ran a small stunt Instagram for friends, minor dares edited to look fearless. He wasn't chasing fame. He wanted evidence he could outdo everyone watching. 2 weeks earlier, coaches benched him for ignoring tackling form instruction. Eli took it as disrespect rather than a correction. Friends later said he became louder after that, more performative. When phones came out, he pushed harder, framing defiance as confidence and treating every recorded moment as something he needed to win. That morning, Eli came with 3 friends and a friend's younger brother as a summer outing before school restarted. They traded phones in line and planned who would film whom. Eli kept repeating one idea: stand on the first drop to feel weightless and to catch it clearly on video. They chose a coaster using lap bars designed to lock a seated rider at the thighs and hips, relying on body weight staying low, especially at the crest when the train tips into a drop. The recorded safety message played. Several riders later interviewed said the group laughed through it. After the bar came down, Eli pressed the bar twice and nodded. On the lift hill, he slides his hips forward a few inches, creating visible slack at his thighs. To other riders, it looked like restless movement. On camera, it's clear his pelvis shifts closer to the seat edge. At the top, just before the chain disengaged, Eli planted his palms on the lap bar and pushed up like a dip. As the train tipped, the train accelerated downward beneath him. He didn't leap. The downward acceleration pulled him out. His hips cleared the bar first, then his torso rose above the restraint line. In the next instant, his legs follow into open space. Platform-mounted security footage later corroborated the timing of the fall. Eli struck the edge of a maintenance catwalk and then the support area below, with a dull impact distinct from the coaster's roar. The phone video shows him rise and vanish mid-frame, then the camera jerks down and the audio becomes layered, screaming. Riders in the same train felt it continue into the next element. Then the brakes hit and the cars stopped farther down the course. Theme park emergency services were immediately notified. Eli was found lying below the track, motionless, blood pooling into the gravel, one arm trapped beneath his body at an extreme angle. He was not breathing. Medics assessed for a pulse, briefly assessed airway and circulation, but the extent of head and neck injury was immediately apparent. Resuscitation efforts were discontinued and death was pronounced shortly. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death catastrophic blunt force trauma. The primary fatal injury was a high cervical spine fracture, meaning the neck broke high enough to instantly disrupt breathing and heart control, with additional head injury and internal bleeding. Toxicology was negative. The report stated the restraint functioned as designed for a seated rider and that standing created a foreseeable ejection risk. Investigators collected the on-ride phone recording, bystander footage, and platform surveillance before closing the ride for inspection. In the weeks that followed, Eli's school quietly banned stunt challenge content tied to team activities after students attempted to imitate the behavior in controlled settings. Eli Carter never made it past the first drop. The next death didn't involve speed at all, only water, timing, and a crowd that assumed supervision meant safety. It was August 18, 2016, at a large regional water park outside Jaipur, India. Afternoon heat pushed families toward the wave pool, the loudest and most crowded attraction in the park. Waves rolled on a timed cycle. Lifeguards stood elevated, scanning the water. From the deck, it looked controlled and familiar. Rohan Mehta was 24 and worked as a junior sales executive for an electronics distributor. He spent most of his week driving between shops, competing with older colleagues for commissions. Friends described him as eager to stand out, especially in groups. He liked dares that made people look twice, not because he was reckless, but because attention felt earned. Rohan was a strong swimmer by casual standards. He'd grown up around pools and believed wave pools were easier than open water because they were supervised. He had no formal training and no respect for posted depth markers. To him, the waves were predictable, something you could play against if you timed them right. That afternoon, the wave pool was near capacity. Shallow and deep zones were separated by floating ropes and warning signs. Rohan crossed into the deep end with friends, then went farther, past the rope, toward the wave generators. Lifeguards signaled for him to move back. He waved them off and stayed where the water felt stronger. When the wave cycle began, Rohan positioned himself facing the oncoming swell. Instead of floating on his back like others nearby, he dove forward, pushing under the wave as it crested. He resurfaced, laughing. Friends at the edge recorded, framing him against the generator wall. He did it again, timing the next wave by watching the water darken and rise. Between cycles, the water near the wall pulled outward. The current tugged at legs and torsos, subtle but constant. Rohan stayed close, drifting a little farther each time. Swimmers nearby adjusted their position or grabbed the rope. He didn't. When the horn sounded, signaling the start of another programmed wave cycle, he took a breath and dove early. The wave hit harder than the previous ones. It forced him down and forward, compressing him toward the sloped concrete floor. His hands didn't reach out in time. The side of his head struck the incline near the sloped concrete base of the wave generator wall. The impact snapped his chin toward his chest and knocked him unconscious instantly. As the wave passed overhead, Rohan remained submerged and motionless. The head impact had stripped away muscle control and protective reflexes, and water entered his airway as turbulence carried him along the sloped floor. Before nearby swimmers recognized the shift from play to distress, the next wave cycle began. Nearby swimmers felt contact, an elbow, a shoulder, but assumed it was part of the crowding. Someone surfaced and shouted his name, then ducked again. The current carried Rohan closer to the wall, face down, his body rotating slowly with the backwash. From the deck, a lifeguard noticed the lack of movement during the trough between waves. A whistle sounded. Another guard cut the wave cycle. The pool's surface flattened unevenly, leaving Rohan visible near the generator area. Several guests continued filming, thinking it was a drill or routine assist. A lifeguard entered the water and reached him within seconds, turning him face up and signaling for help. Rohan was limp and cyanotic, his mouth slack, eyes unfocused. He was pulled to the edge as staff cleared swimmers away and brought a backboard. Rescue breathing and CPR began at the pool edge until EMS arrived within minutes and took over advanced life support. Rohan was transported to a nearby hospital where he never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The post-mortem determined the cause of death was drowning, secondary to blunt force head trauma. The head impact caused immediate loss of consciousness, eliminating protective airway reflexes. Water was found in the lungs, along with facial bruising and a minor cervical spine injury consistent with striking the pool floor. Investigators found no mechanical faults, the wave system functioned normally, and Rohan had entered a restricted zone and repeatedly dove into incoming waves. Rohan Mehta drowned in full view of lifeguards. The next victim stayed seated, followed the track, and died because of a single click undone for a photo. It was August 3rd, 2016, at a large coastal amusement park in Southern California. The park was crowded, orderly, and calm until a brief careless decision unfolded in plain view. Mara Delaney was 29 and worked overnight in a customer-facing supervisory role, a job that demanded calm authority under constant exhaustion. She spent nights managing complaints and conflicts, sleeping in fragments during the day. On her days off, she planned carefully, not to relax but to document that the time counted. She came to the park with her younger sister and a co-worker, expecting something easy. They boarded a slow-moving scenic track ride, a family attraction with open bench seating and a standard lap seatbelt. The vehicles glided close to the ground, following gentle turns through themed structures. The belt was not a harness. It was meant only to keep seated riders from shifting during curves. Mara wanted a candid photo that looked unplanned. As the car idled at dispatch, she adjusted her dress and complained that the seatbelt sat awkwardly. She said she would unclip it briefly to turn around. Before the discussion ended, the vehicle rolled forward. As the ride moved smoothly through its opening section, Mara raised her phone, twisted at the waist to frame her sister, and released the belt. It fell slack, and her hips shifted on the smooth bench surface. As the vehicle entered a shallow banked curve, the motion changed. The speed increased slightly, enough to press riders sideways. Without the belt holding her in place, Mara slid across the bench instead of staying centered. Her phone shook as she tried to keep it raised. Her right shoulder struck the side panel with a sharp jolt. A rider behind her later said it looked like she tried to keep filming instead of grabbing the seat. She reached left, fingertips scraping along the edge of the bench without finding a grip. The surface was slick from mist and previous riders. Her lower body continued to slide. Her hips crossed the seat line, followed by her torso. In platform footage reviewed later, her lower body shifts upward as her weight tips past the edge. Her head struck a rigid boundary near the track channel. The impact was flat and abrupt, cutting through the ride noise. Several witnesses described it as a single hard sound. The phone flew from her hand and skidded along the ride floor. Mara's body collapsed sideways and did not move again. Riders in the vehicle behind saw her collapse sideways and began shouting. Several guests along the walkway pointed as the ride slowed and stopped within seconds. Operators hit emergency controls and called for medical response. Park security arrived quickly, followed by paramedics who assessed the vehicle where it sat on the track. Mara showed no signs of recovery. Paramedics assessed her where the vehicle stopped and pronounced her dead at the scene. Video recorded by nearby guests did not capture the impact itself, but showed her turning, releasing the belt, and slumping as the car entered the curve. Her final position in the seat and the recovered phone corroborated the sequence of events. The coroner ruled the cause of death to be severe blunt head trauma. The fatal injury was a fracture at the base of the skull caused by impact with a fixed edge, resulting in immediate loss of consciousness. There was extensive brain swelling and bleeding, injuries consistent with a sudden forceful strike rather than a fall from height. The investigation found the ride operated as designed. The seatbelt would have limited sideways movement if worn. Unbuckling removed the only restraint keeping her centered, and twisting during motion increased the sliding risk. No mechanical defects were identified. Her sister deleted most of the photos from that day and kept one unposted image from the parking lot, unfiltered and never shared. It was May 19, 2015, at a large regional amusement park in Sandusky, Ohio. The day was clear and crowded but controlled. Trains ran normally, no systems failed, no alarms sounded. What followed came down to timing, confidence, and a single decision made between dispatch intervals. Derek Morrow was 38, a union electrician from Toledo who worked around live panels, moving booms, and rotating equipment. He knew how machines behaved and believed that understanding motion mattered more than posted rules. Co-workers described him as capable but impatient, quick to bypass procedures he thought slowed competent people down. He wore a brand new baseball cap he'd bought that morning, a limited run he'd searched for and paid extra to get. He liked how it fit and how clean it looked. Losing it felt careless and irritating, the kind of mistake he believed shouldn't happen if you were paying attention. That afternoon, Derek stood near a gondola arm swing ride, the kind that rotates large, open gondolas on a sweeping mechanical arm. The arm swung out over a fenced exclusion zone, accelerating and decelerating in wide arcs. As a gondola passed, a gust from its movement knocked Derek's cap loose. It tumbled over the low barrier and landed on the gravel beneath the swing path, untouched. Witnesses later said Derek waited until the gondola arm swung past and the space beneath it cleared. From the queue line, several people saw him point toward the cap lying on the ground. Warning signs were visible along the fence. He stepped over it anyway. Phones were raised as he jogged into the marked exclusion zone. The ride continued cycling, the arm reversing direction as normal. As Derek bent forward and reached down, the gondola arm began its return swing. From the ground, it looked slow, but the video later showed the arm accelerating rapidly through its arc. Several witnesses said the first warning was the sound, a rising mechanical rush, seconds before impact. The gondola struck Derek high across the chest and shoulder line. The force lifted him backward and drove him into the steel support column at the base of the ride. His body folded against it, then collapsed onto the concrete pad beneath the arm. The gondola continued its swing for a brief moment before sensors registered resistance and triggered an automatic shutdown. Inside the gondola, riders felt a sharp jolt and looked down as screaming broke out below. Operators hit the emergency stop immediately and radioed for medical response as the ride locked in place. Park security reached the exclusion zone within minutes and cleared the guests back. Paramedics arrived shortly after. Derek showed no purposeful movement, no breathing, and no detectable pulse. Resuscitation was not attempted due to obvious fatal injuries. The coroner ruled the cause of death to be massive blunt force trauma. The initial strike crushed his chest, fracturing ribs inward and tearing major blood vessels near the heart. Secondary impact with the support column caused additional pelvic and head fractures. Loss of consciousness would have been immediate. Investigators concluded the ride operated normally. The exclusion zone was clearly marked and designed to account for the arm's full movement envelope. Entering it to retrieve personal property placed Derek directly in the path of the ride. The park reopened the following day. No citations were issued. Derek's union later held a closed safety briefing using diagrams of swing arm timing and clearance zones. His cap was returned to his family in an evidence bag, still intact. Derek Morrow died crossing a boundary to retrieve his cap. The next case started when a ride stopped, and one person decided that meant it was safe to get out. It was September 2nd, 2018, at Kings Island in Mason, Ohio. The afternoon was warm, lines stretched long, and brief ride stoppages were common as systems reset. Guests were used to it. From the ground, the paused ride looked ordinary, already blending into the background noise of impatience and phones. Caleb Rios was 26, a junior HVAC apprentice working commercial installations across southern Ohio. His job involved ladders, moving equipment, and mechanical systems that required waiting for lockouts before touching anything. He understood procedures and consequences. Co-workers described him as competent, sometimes impatient, but confident in his own judgment. Outside of work, Caleb wasn't reckless, but he disliked being told to wait. Friends said he often assumed inactivity meant safety. If something wasn't moving, he treated it as off. He believed caution mattered less once equipment stopped, a habit that carried into places where machines resumed motion without warning. The ride was a suspended attraction, with riders seated below the track, legs hanging freely. It used over-the-shoulder restraints in a computerized safety system that paused operation when sensors detected misalignment. The system was designed with one assumption: riders stayed seated until operators intervened. Evacuation procedures depended on that compliance. Mid-cycle, the suspended ride stopped near a support tower roughly 30 feet above ground. A routine sensor misalignment triggered an automatic pause. Operators announced a brief delay and instructed riders to remain seated while the system reset. The announcement was standard. Riders around Caleb groaned, checked phones, and waited. Caleb did not wait. Instead of treating the stop as temporary, he began treating the ride as inactive. He leaned forward and tested the restraint despite repeated instructions. Riders later said he joked about getting down himself. An operator could be heard over the speaker telling everyone to stay seated. Using body weight and repeated rocking, Caleb forced enough slack in the restraint to slip free. The harness was never designed to be opened mid-cycle, but it was also not designed to resist intentional misuse. He stood up inside the ride envelope and stepped onto a narrow maintenance ledge clearly marked for staff use only. From the ground, several guests saw him climb out and assumed an evacuation had begun. Phones were raised. Shouts came from nearby riders telling him to sit back down. Caleb ignored them and reached for a fixed ladder bolted to the tower, equipment intended solely for trained technicians during full shutdown procedures. At that moment, the ride completed its reset. System indicators are activated at the control panel. Operators saw movement on their monitors and moved to emergency controls, but the system had already resumed its programmed motion. The ride arm began rotating back into position as part of the reset sequence, moving smoothly at first, then accelerating along its programmed path. Caleb was still on the ladder, one foot on a rung, his body turned sideways as he tried to climb down. His upper torso extended past the ladder rails and into the space the arm was designed to sweep through during motion. The gap between the arm and the support tower closed almost instantly. There was no pause, no visible hesitation. The arm struck him across the chest and hips, driving him backward into the fixed steel column. His body was compressed between the two structures with enough force to buckle metal panels and deform his posture unnaturally. His arms dropped from the ladder as his torso was crushed inward. Witness videos showed the arm re-entering frame, followed by a sudden stop. Riders below saw Caleb pinned against the tower, unmoving. Sensors triggered an automatic shutdown, locking the ride in place. Filming gave way to shouting as the crowd realized this was not an evacuation, and staff rushed to the tower base. Operators triggered the emergency stop again. The ride locked in place with Caleb trapped against the structure. Park security initiated a 911 call within seconds. EMS reached the base of the tower in under 7 minutes, but Caleb showed no purposeful movement or breathing. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner reported traumatic crushing injuries. Compression to the chest and abdomen caused organ rupture and tearing of major blood vessels. Multiple rib and pelvic fractures were consistent with being pinned between a moving ride component and a fixed structure. Loss of consciousness would have occurred almost immediately due to the severity of the injuries. Investigators determined the ride operated exactly as designed. The reset sequence was routine and automatic. By leaving his seat, Caleb placed himself inside an active movement zone never intended for riders. In the weeks that followed, the park installed additional warning placards at loading platforms, reinforced fencing near maintenance access points, and updated ride announcements to emphasize remaining seated during stoppages. Thank you for watching. Click here for more videos.